The businessman had it all: power, wealth, and a loyal wife who had supported him from the very beginning. But his ego blinded him. He let himself be swept away by an illusion, traded something certain for something fleeting, and what he never saw coming was the fall. Because while he was celebrating his new beginning, his wife was planning her revenge. A cold, calculated, and merciless revenge. And by the time he realized it, it would already be too late. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any inspiring stories I share. At the pinnacle of the business world, Martin Lombardi had it all: power, wealth, and recognition. From the outside, his life seemed perfect: a successful businessman, running a thriving company, and living a lifestyle that many envied. But what no one knew was that behind this facade of success, his ego had become his worst enemy. Obsessed with image and external validation, Martin surrounded himself only with people who fed his vanity, losing sight of what truly mattered. 4 years, by his side, had been Laura, his wife. Beautiful, elegant, and commanding respect wherever she went, Laura had been instrumental in the company's growth. She had always been there, supporting him through the toughest times, helping him build his empire from the shadows. She wasn't just his wife, she was his greatest ally, the one who sacrificed so much so he could achieve his dreams. But over time, Martin stopped admiring her. In his mind, he convinced himself that she was no longer enough. Not because Laura had changed, but because his own arrogance and superficiality blinded him to her true worth. He no longer saw in her the excitement, the novelty, that had once captivated him. Martin wanted something new. Something that would make him feel superior to others. And that's when Valeria entered the picture. Valeria was a young Venezuelan woman with stunning curves, the kind of woman who seemed designed for seduction. She knew exactly how to move, what to say, and most importantly, how to manipulate. Opportunistic and cunning, she had a clear goal: to replace Laura and take everything. From the moment she walked into the company as a secretary, Valeria began planting seeds of doubt in Martin's mind. She knew his weakness was his ego, so she played with it like an expert. Small comments, whispered suggestions, flattery disguised as concern. "You're a powerful man, Martin. A man of your status should be with a woman who reflects his greatness. I don't mean to be cruel, but Laura is no longer at your level. People have noticed." Each word was a dagger in Martin's mind, pushing him further into doubting his wife. Deep down, he knew Laura was a woman of immense value. But his ego was stronger. He began to see her as a burden, a weight holding him back from something better. And Valeria knew it. She wasn't just beautiful, she was strategic. She didn't act on impulse, she played a calculated game. Every seductive glance, every admiring gesture toward Martin was another piece in her puzzle. Her goal wasn't just to seduce him. It was to become the only woman in his life. The seed of betrayal had already been planted. Blinded by the illusion of power and status, Martin began pulling away from Laura, without even realizing he was digging his own grave. And by the time he did, it would already be too late. The annual business gala was approaching. It was the most important event of the year, a place where the elite of the business world gathered to seal deals, showcase their success, and assert their influence. Attending with the right person could mean the difference between being admired or being forgotten. Martin knew he had to make an impression. He wasn't just another businessman, he was a powerful man, and the world needed to see him that way. But a nagging doubt started creeping into his mind. Could he really show up at this event with Laura? That's when Valeria struck with surgical precision. One afternoon in his office, while going over the event's preparations, Valeria leaned in, her gaze calculated, her smile promising understanding. "Martin, I know this isn't easy to say, but someone has to." Martin looked up from his papers, intrigued. "You need to think about your image. Do you really believe Laura is the best choice to accompany you to an event like this?" The comment hit like a poisoned dart. Martin frowned. Until that moment, he had never considered Laura a problem. "I don't mean to be cruel," Valeria continued, her voice sweet as honey, "but everyone will notice she's no longer at your level. I don't want people speaking poorly of you. Not after everything you've built." A sharp pang hit Martin's chest. Was it true? Had Laura become an obstacle to his image? Valeria, sensing his hesitation, skillfully shifted the conversation elsewhere. But the seed had already been planted. Over the next few days, Martin began to see his wife differently. Every gesture, every word, Every outfit she wore suddenly felt inadequate. He convinced himself that Valeria was right. He deserved someone who reflected his greatness. And when Valeria subtly suggested that she could be the one to accompany him to the gala, the idea no longer seemed absurd. The night of truth. The night of the gala finally arrived. Laura was excited, having spent hours getting ready. She still believed Martin saw her as his partner, his equal. When she approached him with a warm smile, expecting his approval, she was met with nothing but coldness. "You're not going." Laura turned to him, stunned. What did you just say?" "I can't show up with someone like you. You don't fit the image I need to project." The blow was direct. Laura felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. "Martin, I'm your wife. What are you talking about?" But all she saw in Martin's eyes was indifference. "I've made my decision. You're no longer the woman I want to be seen with." Silence. The air turned heavy. For the first time in her life, Laura realized she no longer recognized the man she had married. For years, Laura had been the backbone of the company and Martin's unwavering support. She had stood by him when he was a nobody, when he had barely any resources and only uncertain dreams. She had helped him every step of the way, pouring her effort and love into the business that had now become an empire. But now, the man who once loved her looked at her with disdain. That night, Laura got ready with care. She knew the gala was important and wanted to look impeccable. She chose an elegant dress, the kind that had always made Martin look at her with pride. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup highlighted her natural beauty. But when she walked down the stairs, ready to leave, she was met with a cold, distant stare. Martin looked at her with no emotion. No compliments. No admiring smile. Just silence. "Why are you dressed like that?" he finally asked, his tone indifferent. Laura frowned, confused. "It's the gala. I thought you wanted us to look good together." Martin crossed his arms. There was no trace of the man who once adored her. "You're not going, Laura." A chill ran down her spine. What did you just say?" Martin sighed, as if the situation was an inconvenience to him. Every word that left his mouth was a dagger straight to Laura's heart. "I can't show up with someone like you. You don't fit the image I need to project." Silence. Laura felt a hollow pain in her chest. Since when had her husband seen her this way? "Martin, I'm your wife. I've been with you every step of the way. How can you say this to me?" But Martin didn't even waver. There was no compassion in his eyes. "Things change, Laura. We can't cling to the past." His words were final. There was no going back. Laura stared at him, hoping for even a flicker of realization, a sign that he understood what he was doing. But his expression never changed. "Does this have to do with Valeria?" she asked, her voice trembling, even though deep down, she already knew the answer. Martin smirked arrogantly. "This has nothing to do with her. This is about me. I've evolved, Laura. I'm not the same man you married." The final blow. Martin turned away, without a hint of remorse. "Pack your things. I want you gone before I get back." Laura felt her world shatter into 1,000 pieces. But something inside her awakened. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to prove him wrong. Laura stood still, motionless, unresponsive. The air in the room grew heavy. She had never imagined that the man she had shared her life with would turn his back on her so cruelly. Martin, on the other hand, seemed impatient. There wasn't a single trace of guilt on his face. "You're still here? Laura, don't make this harder than it has to be." His words cut through her like knives. Just a few months ago, he had looked at her with love. Now, he didn't even consider her worthy of a proper goodbye. "Harder." Her voice cracked for an instant, but she refused to let him see her break. "After everything I did for you, you're throwing me away like a disposable employee?" Martin sighed in frustration and walked toward the door. He didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye. "Don't exaggerate. Let's just accept that this isn't working anymore. I've evolved, Laura. Meanwhile, you're stuck in the past." The words were a low blow. Stuck? After everything she had done to help him build his empire? But instead of rage, she felt something worse, emptiness. Martin grabbed an envelope from his desk and extended it toward her without even glancing at her. "Here. A fair compensation so you can move on with your life." Laura looked at the envelope, then at her husband. It was money. Nothing more. After everything they had shared, everything she had sacrificed for him, her worth to Martin had been reduced to a mere transaction. Her pride burned in her throat. For a moment, she was on the verge of tears. But then, something inside her woke up. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the envelope and slipped it into her purse without a word. Martin raised an eyebrow. Maybe he had expected screaming, tears, pleading. Instead, Laura gave him a cold smile. "All right, Martin. I'll leave. But remember this." She stepped closer, holding his gaze with an intensity that made him take a slight step back. "By the time you realize your mistake, it will be too late." Martin rolled his eyes and smirked arrogantly. "I doubt that, Laura. Now leave." Without another word, Laura grabbed her purse and walked out of the house without looking back. But as she made her way to her car, her mind was already working at full speed. Martin thought she would leave quietly, that she would accept defeat. But what he didn't know was that Laura wasn't the kind of woman to be humiliated without consequences. She got into her car and sat still for a few seconds. She didn't have a plan yet. But one thing was certain, Martin would pay dearly for his betrayal. Not today. Not tomorrow. But when the time came, her revenge would be ruthless. As Laura walked away from the house, her heart shattered, Valeria stepped in with a triumphant smile. Everything was finally going according to plan. Martin had chosen her. She was now the woman who would take Laura's place, the one who would stand by his side at the most exclusive events, the one who would wear the finest brands, the one who would indulge in his wealth. In her mind, Laura no longer existed. She had been replaced. And soon, she would be forgotten. "Baby, now that we can finally be together without any obstacles, we need to do something unforgettable for the gala," Valeria whispered, sliding into his arms with a seductive gaze. Martin, intoxicated by the novelty, held her proudly. "You're right. I want everyone to see that I'm with a woman worthy of my success." Valeria smirked cunningly. She loved that he thought this was his idea. "Then we can't cut corners. I need a breathtaking dress, jewelry to match. I want every woman at that gala to wish they were me, and every man to envy you." Martin let out a confident laugh. He loved her ambitious attitude. "Don't worry about the money, my love. Buy whatever you want. I want you to dazzle everyone." That was exactly what Valeria wanted to hear. Wasting no time, she grabbed his credit card and started spending like never before. Designer shoes, exclusive gowns, jewelry worth a fortune. With every purchase, she felt more powerful. "I'll need a private stylist. And maybe a car that matches the occasion." Martin, blinded by excitement, nodded without hesitation. "Take it. You deserve it." To him, this was all part of his transformation. He saw himself as a man reborn, free from the chains of his past. Valeria reveled in every second of her new life. She pictured herself walking into the gala on Martin's arm, feeling the envious gazes upon her. But her arrogance blinded her. Neither she nor Martin realized that while they were celebrating their so-called victory, Laura was already making her move. On the other side of the city, Laura stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes burning with determination. She wasn't the same woman anymore. Sadness had been replaced by fire, by an unyielding will. Martin had underestimated her. Valeria had made the mistake of thinking she had won. But they weren't playing the same game. When Laura returned, it wouldn't be to ask for explanations. It would be to win. Laura drove aimlessly for several minutes. Her mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions. She had been humiliated, betrayed. Everything she had built alongside Martin, all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights working by his side, tossed away as if they had never mattered. But if Martin thought he had destroyed her, he was wrong. She pulled up in front of a luxury hotel and turned off the engine. She didn't have a concrete plan yet, but one certainty burned inside her. This wouldn't be the last time Martin saw her. She took a deep breath and grabbed her phone. There was a number in her contacts she hadn't dialed in years. She hesitated for a moment. She knew that once she made this call, there would be no turning back. Finally, she pressed call and lifted the phone to her ear. "I need to see you. Now." On the other end of the line, there was a pause. Then, A firm voice responded. "Tell me where you are." 30 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the hotel. The back door opened, and a man stepped out, imposing, exuding authority. Laura's heart raced for a brief moment. She knew she was making a dangerous decision, but she felt no fear. "Laura." His voice was deep and steady. She exhaled, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "I want back what's mine, Gabriel." Gabriel Rivas. One of the most influential businessmen in the country. And in the past, Martin's old friend, until Martin betrayed him. Gabriel had been one of the first investors in Martin's company. He had trusted him, bet on his talent, and Martin had stabbed him in the back to take full control. Since then, Gabriel had been waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike back. And now, that moment had arrived. Gabriel let out a subtle smile as he held the car door open for Laura. "I knew this day would come. And trust me, I'm more than ready to take Martin Lombardi down." Laura stepped into the car without hesitation. "I want you to teach me how to play his game." Gabriel studied her for a moment, intrigued. She wasn't the same woman as before. "Martin made the biggest mistake of his life underestimating you." Laura smirked coldly. "And he's going to pay for it." As the car pulled away, disappearing into the night, Laura felt something shift inside her forever. She wasn't weak. She wasn't a woman who would sit back and cry. If Martin and Valeria thought they had won, they were about to get the surprise of their lives. This time, Laura would play by their rules. But this time, she would win. She was no longer the devoted wife. Now, she was a woman determined to take back everything that belonged to her. And when she did, there would be no mercy. Laura woke up the next morning in the hotel suite. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel sadness. She felt determination. She got up and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was no longer the same. Her skin still bore traces of exhaustion. Her hair reflected months of emotional turmoil. But her eyes burned with a new fire. The pain was still there, but now it was her fuel. Her strength. She wasn't going to win Martin back. She didn't want to. She wanted something far greater. She wanted to destroy him. Not impulsively. Not with blind rage. With strategy. With intelligence. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. "I want the best. No limits." On the other end of the line, the stylist who had once worked with her didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll see you in an hour." A rebirth. The next few hours were a transformation. Every detail had to be calculated. Manicure, brows, lashes, skin, every imperfection erased, every feature enhanced. Next step, her hair. "I want something unforgettable." Laura's voice was firm. The change had to be radical. A new color, a new cut, a symbol of the woman about to emerge. When she finally looked at herself in the mirror, she smiled with satisfaction. But there was one final touch. The dress. She visited the most exclusive boutiques in the city. She wasn't looking for just any gown. The dress had to speak for itself. It had to scream power, success, transformation. After trying on several options, she found it. A custom-made masterpiece, one that embraced her figure perfectly, that highlighted every one of her best features. When she put it on and looked in the mirror, she knew. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the woman Martin had discarded. Now, she was a queen. And at the gala, everyone would know it. The final touch. The last stop, the jewelry store. A queen needed her crown. She chose a pair of diamond earrings and a ring that would seal her new identity. No more submission. No more tears. That night, when she walked into the gala, she would be the woman Martin would never be able to have again. She sat on the edge of the bed, poured herself a glass of wine. The game had just begun. She looked at her reflection one last time. Laura was gone. In her place, a new woman had been born. The one who would make Martin regret the day he let her go. The night had arrived. The most anticipated gala of the year was about to begin. Bright lights illuminated the majestic entrance of the ballroom, where dozens of businessmen, politicians, and celebrities arrived in their finest attire. Everyone who mattered was there. Martin, with Valeria on his arm, basked in the attention. "Look at them, my love. They're watching us. They know who we are." he said arrogantly, raising his glass of wine. Valeria smiled, adjusting her golden dress, which left little to the imagination. That's because you're finally with the right woman. Martin kissed her hand. Everything seemed perfect. And then, everything changed. The grand doors of the ballroom swung open, and the murmur of the crowd came to a halt. Every eye in the room turned toward the woman who had just entered. Tall, elegant, dressed in a black gown that sculpted her figure with precision, a design that didn't just whisper luxury. It screamed power. Laura. Every step she took was firm, deliberate, calculated. There was no trace of the woman who months ago had been humiliated. The sharp sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed like a death sentence. The guests whispered among themselves. Is that Laura? It can't be. She looks incredible. Eyes followed her as she moved forward, a ghost of a smile barely visible on her lips. She knew the effect she was causing, and she reveled in it. A waiter approached, offering her a glass of champagne. She took it gracefully, unhurried, in complete control. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, Martin felt a lump form in his throat. What is she doing here? Valeria whispered, digging her nails into his arm. But Martin couldn't answer. He couldn't move. The air in the room had turned heavy. For the first time in his life, Martin felt fear. Laura stopped in the center of the room. She raised her glass and toasted, alone. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The crowd watched her in awe. The men admired her. The women envied her. And from the far end of the ballroom, Martin couldn't look away. He felt a hollow emptiness in his chest. It wasn't just guilt. It was something worse. Regret. His mind replayed the moment he had discarded her. The cruel words he had thrown at her. He had thought she would never recover. But now, there she was. Stronger than ever. More powerful than anyone else in that room. And the worst part? She wasn't looking at him. There was no love in her expression. Only indifference. The gala went on, but the spotlight was no longer on Martin and Valeria. Every gaze was now fixed on Laura. Every step she took radiated confidence. Every movement made it clear she had returned as a powerful woman. The most influential businessmen surrounded her, eager to engage in conversation. Some of them, the same ones who had once admired Martin. Laura, darling, where have you been? We've missed you. The gala wouldn't be the same without you. Rumor has it you're coming back stronger than ever. Is it true? Laura smiled subtly and took a slow sip from her glass. Let's just say, it's a new era. Across the room. Martin tried to ignore it. But it was impossible. For the first time in his life, he was no longer the center of attention. And this was just the beginning of his downfall. Martin gripped his wine glass too tightly. His knuckles turned white. The sight of Laura, surrounded by investors, smiling with absolute confidence, sent a chill down his spine, one he couldn't ignore. She wasn't the same woman he had discarded. She wasn't the submissive wife he once knew. Now, she was the one in control. This can't be happening. He murmured, unable to look away. Beside him, Valeria shifted uncomfortably. Why is everyone around her? What is she even doing here? Martin had no answers. He only knew one thing. Something was slipping out of his control. And then, the unthinkable happened. A high-ranking executive approached him, wearing a knowing smirk. Martin, I have to congratulate you. Martin frowned. Congratulate him? For what? The executive chuckled, raising his glass. For stepping aside and making way for Laura. A cold sweat ran down Martin's back. The executive's words echoed in his mind. For stepping aside and making way for Laura. No. It couldn't be true. It made no sense. He turned sharply toward her. Laura was still smiling, calm, composed, as if she had already won. Martin needed answers. Summoning what little courage he had left, he walked toward the group of investors. Laura. I see you're enjoying yourself. He forced a smile, but his voice gave him away. Laura met his gaze with absolute calm, as if he were irrelevant. Martin. What a surprise to see you here. Just the fact that she called him by his name, without the warmth of before, sent a sharp pang through his chest. The investors laughed. Come on, Martin. Don't be modest. Let's raise a glass to Laura, the new majority shareholder of the company. Time stopped. Martin's eyes widened. His face turned pale. What did you just say?" he whispered. Laura smiled. She had waited far too long for this moment. "Oh, darling. I forgot to tell you something." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I'm the one in charge now." Martin's face fell. A wave of panic crashed over him, unstoppable and merciless. You can't," he stammered, but his voice lacked the authority it once had. Laura met his gaze with crushing serenity. She had waited too long for this moment. "Oh, but I can." Her smile was ice-cold. And then, the sound of doors bursting open shattered the tension in the ballroom. Several figures in dark suits strode in with purpose. The murmurs intensified. An agent stepped forward, pulling out a document. "Mr. Lombardi, you are under arrest for financial fraud and tax evasion. You will come with us." A heavy silence fell over the room. Valeria instinctively stepped back. "No. There must be some mistake." Martin shouted, but no one defended him. The officers gripped his arms. It was over. Valeria, still in shock, took one step back, then another. Martin searched for her eyes, desperate. He expected her to stand by him, to fight for him. But instead, she simply said, "I can't be involved in this." And with that, she turned around and left him behind. Martin felt his world collapse. He had lost. From across the room, Laura lifted her glass. And she toasted. Days after the gala, the newspaper headlines were ruthless. Martin Lombardi, arrested for fraud and corruption. Former tycoon falls from grace. His wife Laura takes control of the company. Laura flipped through the newspaper, a calm smile on her lips. Everything had gone exactly as she planned. Seated in her new office, in the very chair that once belonged to Martin, she gazed out the window with quiet satisfaction. She had gone from a discarded wife to one of the most powerful women in the country. Under her leadership, the company rebounded quickly. Investors backed her. The contacts Martin had lost were now surrounding her. But the most gratifying part? No one spoke of Martin as a successful businessman anymore. Now, when people mentioned his name, it was synonymous with failure and scandal. "Mrs. Lombardi, they're ready for the meeting," her assistant announced. Laura picked up her briefcase and rose with effortless confidence. "Let's show them why this company finally has a real leader." Martin sat on the bed of his prison cell, his gaze lost on the cold gray wall. Everything he once had, his power, his fortune, his reputation, had crumbled in a matter of days. The same friends who once praised him wouldn't even answer his calls. Valeria, the woman he left Laura for, had abandoned him the moment they put handcuffs on him. "I knew this would happen," muttered his cellmate, an older man with tired eyes. Martin didn't respond. He didn't have the strength. Then, the television in the common area caught his attention. On the screen, Laura appeared, radiant, confident, being interviewed on primetime television. "Under your leadership, the company has reached new heights. How did you do it?" the journalist asked. Laura smiled calmly. "Sometimes, crises force us to see what truly matters." Martin clenched his jaw. Laura hadn't just moved on. She had erased him from history. The journalist continued. "Many thought that after your divorce, you would disappear from the business world. But not only did you make a comeback, you are now one of the most influential women in the country." Laura lifted her wine glass with effortless elegance. "Sometimes, betrayal is the push we need to remember who we really are." The inmates in the common area whispered among themselves. "Isn't that the guy who's locked up here?" "Yeah, that's him. He used to be a big deal, until they threw him in here." Martin felt heat rise to his face. He had gone from being feared and respected to just another prisoner. The interview ended with an image of Laura toasting at an exclusive event. Martin sank further into his seat. He knew that when he finally walked out of that prison, there would be nothing left waiting for him. Laura had won. I hope you enjoyed this story. I'm sure you'll also love the next one. Click on the video on the screen right now, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching until the end. See you soon.